All right, welcome to episode 2 of the Civitas Buzz with Paul Smith, Ryan Osher, and Brett Stango, and myself, George Eady. We are heading into this episode now full of confidence from the first episode, 231 views, ladies and gentlemen, and 7 thumbs ups. And the first question I have for each of you is: are those thumbs up you guys, or are they our loyal fan base?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was you. I thought it might. Brilliant. So, let's get into it without any further ado. Again, Civitas Buzz is about bringing you on a monthly basis some of the top insights, conversations, and tools that are emerging from our intimate conversations with members all throughout South Africa and beyond. And the first topic we're going to get into today is this whole question of transparency and how much of it to bring into how we run our businesses. To kick off today's proceedings, Ryan, I'd like you to share. You've actually lived in an organization where this has been taken to the nth degree. Let us know your thoughts.
Awesome, thanks, George. So we had a really interesting question within a conversation this week, which was, how transparent should I be with my team? And I think it's one of those questions that there wasn't necessarily a right answer to. So as you said, I'd been working in a business previously where we had like a real-time dashboard on the screen. It was pretty valuable from the perspective of celebrating small wins. So when you saw that sales ticker move up, it created like a nice sense of team camaraderie. I've seen this go horribly wrong in the law industry, where like billing targets are distributed and it creates a lot of tension within the organization. But Matilda Collins has like a really interesting article called Transparency at Work, and there she speaks of the value of transparency, but when it comes down to cross-departmental collaboration, increased levels of accountability. I'm going to reference the book From Impossible to Inevitable, and they speak about how sales should be always reporting to marketing and marketing should be reporting to sales, which obviously requires a degree of transparency. But the question for me is like, where do you draw the line? And even if salaries remain, private, like how do you manage this process of all of a sudden being non-transparent to fully transparent? And what are the other potential issues that might come out of it? One of the comments that was raised is, if your team all of a sudden sees these revenue numbers but doesn't understand the cost structure of the business, are they going to be motivating salary increases but not actually knowing, what the full P&L looks like? So I find it just to be a really interesting topic.
That might be a great way to start a conversation that actually gets people to learn more about how the business works and really understand those cost structures as well.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple examples where it's gone horribly wrong. So there was a person who's part of the network, ran a big call center. They like open sourced that, and it blew up in their faces big time because they didn't understand. So I think one of the sort of data points you want to think through is, what's the maturity level of a startup? I think there is this like desire in especially South African tech startups, to go, ooh, Silicon Valley's doing this, let's just do Silicon Valley in South Africa. And sometimes the context is different. Sometimes it translates and sometimes it doesn't. So I think if you have a very mature, sort of well-educated workforce, I think it's much, much easier to be transparent. Where I've seen it work is in the manufacturing world, where you're doing maybe more entry-level labor, is a very strong educational program. So they have, for example, Edels did an amazing sort of turnaround when the Chinese started importing shoes, and they managed to survive and thrive, and they trained up all of the sort of people on the shop floor to understand the P&L, and it was a long process. It wasn't just me like, oh, everything's transparent. People don't really understand what the numbers mean.
So
at the Answer series, we ran a pretty open setup where, just to sort of offer both a validating and counterpoint to what you're saying, Paul, where the staff were right from minimum wage workers all through to executives. And the culture there had been, before I arrived, on a monthly basis share everything, not salaries. That was not something that was shared. And I think even though there's a lot of maturity that exists in many people, it's something that's just super tough to digest at like a raw animalistic level. Obviously, maturity based, like you said. But I was really encouraged by the incredible loyalty and understanding and ultimately commitment staff had based off of being informed by the ebbs and flows of the business, even when it got tough. So that was cool. Yeah, and Brett, you had something there too.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's got a lot to do with the culture of the organization. And I think some of the experience shares that you guys have brought up involve actually introducing transparency. And a lot of the time that's done through almost like a bit of shock therapy. And obviously that's going to come with its problems. But there was a case quite a few years back, I don't know where they are as a business today, but Flight Center was quite famous for the practice of actually posting salaries on the wall. And the way that they worked is that the whole business was actually divided into teams of no more than 12 people. So each team had a maximum of 12 people in it. Their salaries were transparent on the wall. And if somebody was hired in at a higher level, at like a market rate that was higher than everybody else in the team, their salaries were all adjusted to that new rate, which is quite a thing. But basically what they're telling their people is, you don't have to come and motivate for salary increases. You don't have to go around into the market and try your luck. We're going to keep you at the market rate, and we're going to actually make sure that we, value everybody and do that as part of our general practice. So, I mean, it's certainly got an appeal to it, I feel. Obviously, openness and transparency has an appeal to it. There are some dangers there, but I think if the culture is really like that from the beginning, or it's really embedded into the business throughout, you can get to a point where that's the way people relate to each other. Is that, you don't have to hide your salary because you're not competing with the person next to you for budget. And you're not hiding your salary because you're doing less work than them, but actually earning more. Like, these are all things that are hidden by non-transparency.
I guess another way to look at that would be if the culture in the business is rewarding and incentivizing staff on the overall net growth of the business, such through bonuses or profit share, there is almost a requirement for that transparency, because as a collective, the better you do as an organization, the more that will just filter down. And there have been a couple stories within the network around that approach, and a high level of transparency around, if we exceed budget, everyone's getting more, but if we miss budget, everyone's getting less. But in order to know where they're lying, you got to know what those numbers look like.
Yeah, 100%. I think it is definitely a cultural thing. If you look at Apple and you compare it to Google, much more transparent culture, and then Apple, basically, like, you don't know what the person in the cubicle next to you is working on. It's like a very secretive culture, even within the own organization. So I definitely think there's what type of culture you're trying to build, and what are the objectives you have to design for it.
Probably the most influential author I ever read on this was Frederick Laloux. He wrote Reinventing Organizations, and he has some epic material on his website as well for this. But the whole idea is that there's this thing called the high consciousness organization. But if you try to make too big a leap right through to the most conscious kind of, where often they talk about like leaderless teams and super transparency, like you're talking, it's like too much of a leap. But what he does is he guides leaders to think about the part of the organization that they can't stomach anymore. And maybe it's an element of your business that you feel like you want to now make transparent, and embark on making that transparent, and then something else, and almost make gains at the edges rather than as like a grand sweep, like you're mentioning, Brett, like that shock tactic. So definitely recommend checking that out, since policy setting is ultimately what CEOs all need to be responsible for, and taking a policy boilerplate off the shelf seldom allows one to have our signature, our culture embedded in the policy of the organization, and I think that's a missed opportunity. So yeah, just a couple of tips from there. I think let's go to our next topic, guys. Managing setbacks. For whatever reason, we talked about the USAID thing, some ups and downs that inevitably occur in the journey of being an entrepreneur. Often our members expressing it most fully for the first time in group sessions, because they can't always talk to their wife about it, or they can't always talk to their business partner about what they're feeling. How are you guys seeing that play out, and what are you seeing members doing that's really helping them navigate those ups and downs, guys?
Talk to ChatGPT about it. No, I think one of the common shares I always come across is the whole energy audit by Matt Mashori. So actually just looking at what you're doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and just flagging the things that are like just draining your energy. I know I personally try and ensure that each week there's at least like 15-20% of work that I just can't wait to do. And I know by doing it, it just immediately lifts my energy. But, I think it's a tough one. We see it happening all the time. There's this big prospectful deal, you lose it. And from being up here, you all of a sudden down at the bottom, and the smaller deals don't seem as exciting anymore. So I'd be super keen to hear from you guys, what you've also seen to work in that domain.
I mean, to me, the most common thing, I know we like to say that our Civitas forums are not just therapy for founders, but they sometimes are therapy for founders. And the most common thing that I see is founders come into those forums kind of knowing what it is they need to do. They understand the problem in their business, and they have quite a good inclination of the hard decisions they need to make, but they're looking for validation around that. And when you've got 7 other CEOs that can look at your situation objectively, they're not investors, they have no other links to your business, and they can look at a situation objectively and say, yeah, this is the hard call that you need to make. That gives you a lot of validation, and to a large degree the courage, and you also have the ability to get in 1 or 2 calls and phone a couple of people that have done it before. And I think that sort of support in making those hard decisions is one of the biggest things that actually helps our founders get through those sort of really difficult situations, those setbacks.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of those hard conversations where people are being knocked and they kind of like are questioning, is this the right route? Shouldn't I go back and just get a corporate job? I think just often what'll happen is you see some people struggling, and then suddenly a year or 2 later their business is flying. They've tripled revenue, things are going well, they're paying themselves a good salary. And I think just being surrounded by case studies where you've seen someone go through like a dark period and come out the other side, I think like having that personal close contact with that type of thing, I think encourages people to keep going, stay in the fight and not quit. The other share I love to give on the setback stuff is that work by Jim Collins. So Collins did, he obviously Built to Last, Good to Great, but I think his last book, or second last book, is my favorite, which is Great by Choice. And in Great by Choice, what they did a study on the successful companies versus the control group of unsuccessful companies. And they measured luck events. And basically they came up with this concept called return on luck, which was basically what ended up happening with the great companies. When they had a good luck event, they would like really leverage it. And then when they had a bad luck event, they would leverage it too. So if, say, for example, they got something wrong with the business model and there was a bad luck event, they would change their business model so that would never happen again. Where often the bad luck events for the companies that didn't succeed long term at the same level, they weren't taking the lessons from the bad luck. So I always, in my own life, as well as the experience shares in the forums, is like, how do you turn this like bad luck event into something good, that you don't make the same mistake again, and like leverage the return on luck.
Awesome. Let's get into one of those pressures that is obviously the journey of any entrepreneur, which is what's my burn rate, what kind of runway have I got to keep this business alive. The question of raising capital is often on the mind. Like, if only I had another a couple million, surely it would be a whole bunch easier. But then on the other hand, some founders delay raising capital because it preserves a level of freedom. And then I guess there's a range of options in between that, guys. What are you seeing in the groups? Are guys tending to not raise or raise too much or raise too little? Yeah, Brett, what are you noticing on this one?
Yeah, all over the map, all those things. Um, as someone that's sort of bootstrapped for businesses, I often speak to other founders that are very grateful that they were sort of able to bootstrap their businesses and didn't have to take money. Some obviously realized they could have grown a lot bigger, a lot faster if they did. But it depends on what you're trying to build, and it depends on what your ability to scale is. What's really heartbreaking for me is when I find businesses that have built a great product, they actually got a good market, they got product market fit, they've got a good team that's working well together, and they just kind of 6 or 12 months short on cash. Like they did an early seed raise and they just didn't raise enough, and they underestimated what it was going to cost them to get to a certain point, or they didn't get product market fit with their exact first idea, and they had to pivot a bit and change their target market or change their product a little bit. And it just took them that extra 6 months longer. Happens all the time. I mean, obviously we know that the biggest reason for businesses going out of business is running out of cash. But you just see how it happens. And it's so hard when there's a really good business with a really good prospect and they're just 6 to 12 months away. And you know that if you could get investors to really understand the business and understand the opportunity here, you would raise cash quite easily, but they leave it too late. And nobody can do a due diligence in like a month or two. So they just get themselves into real trouble. And, potentially good businesses don't make it. So I'd love to find or have a Rolodex of angel investors that can like turn around $500,000 decisions in 2 weeks, because I think there are so many opportunities for those guys, those people. I mean, they say you don't make money on a property when you sell it, you make money when you buy. And these are distressed sellers to some degree, but they really need that help. And if they get it, they'll make it as businesses.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts there is that it's a completely different game that you're playing. So I would say it's probably 80% of the network is 70 to 80% of the network are bootstrapping, and maybe 20 to 30% are on the fundraise journey. The biggest issue I think here in the South African context is that you have a lot of people who are able to raise a seed round, but then they're not able to make enough progress to be able to raise a Series A. So I think you have like a big drop off, exactly like Brett says. And in my previous life, we did a startup boot camp for early stage founders, and again we would see that where people would raise a few million, get the product up and running, and then just not make it. So I think in the South African context, if it is possible to build a service business that morphs into a tech business over time, I think that's a cool strategy that potentially can work, and we've seen it work with a number of businesses. The other thought to take into account is that if you are going to go for the I've got to get a 50x or 100x return for my investors, the incentives are slightly different aligned to the investor versus what you're trying to do. So you as a founder, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and basically you want to make sure that basket succeeds. As an investor, you might be looking at 10 or 20 different baskets, and you're looking for the big exit. So sometimes there's a little bit of a different incentives for a founder versus an investor, and can create some conflict.
But I wonder how much of these challenges come just due to risk tolerance in South Africa, because the seed rounds are generally quite small, which requires the founders to re-raise quite soon, probably having given up a share bit of equity. Then now, if they do land up re-raising, like we've seen multiple stories of the founder diluting to a point where they just lose complete motivation in their business because they're a tiny shareholder feeling like an employee. And I think there's also a lot of people we've seen try raise smart money in the hope that these investors come in and just open up all these doors. And out of like multiple instances, I've seen it work maybe once where it's been like an absolute game changer for the business. But on numerous occasions, big institutional investors promising X, Y, and Z, and it never materializes. So, I wonder how much, if there was more of a risk appetite in South Africa for bigger seed rounds, like what impact could that have? Because similarly, I've seen companies, to Brett's point, raise too late. And like the big lesson that the founder learned in that instance was they didn't raise when things were going well. They waited and waited, and there was an event that came around that prohibited them from raising that second round. Had they done it a year earlier, they probably would have got what they wanted, but they were waiting for a bigger valuation, more revenue in the business. So there are, I guess, multiple factors to consider, but the maturity of the model, I imagine, has some part to play.
I think one factor is the Joburg versus Cape Town dynamic, and obviously Cape Town just being far superior to Joburg in all respects. With the members down here coming across capital that is smart, and I've heard a couple of stories, obviously tongue-in-cheek there, chaps, but a couple of stories just in this last couple of weeks, where I was almost fishing for that. I'm sure you regret raising, and diluting, and they were like, no, man, it was the best decision. If anything, there was an aspect of cheap as there was an open market, we should have actually attacked it harder sooner. And I was just really encouraged, and I know we're seeing it down. We got one CEO group within the forum dedicated to business folks that are taking a holdco strategy, where they're investing in 3, 4, 5 businesses, and really working with them actively to grow them. And I think that's potentially a really good news scene for development of entrepreneurship in South Africa, not just in Cape Town, to be seeing that coming through more and more.
But what I've seen dealing with the discrepancy based on what Ryan's saying is with the European businesses, I've seen a few now that have raised too much money and have been unable to deliver against expectations. And have actually closed down as a result of that. They just raised too much upfront, set massive expectations, and couldn't keep it going and couldn't deliver. That I almost never see in South Africa. And I think the expectation of small seed rounds has actually led South African businesses to asking for too little upfront. They underestimate the runway requirements a lot of the time, and they get into this problem of being really close to breaking through the ceiling that they need to break through, but running out of money, as I said, 6 to 12 months before. And that does seem to be a bit of a South African phenomenon.
Well, on the topic of, having enough money, a huge element of that is obviously being able to convert interest in the business into meetings, into sign-ups, and into contracts. So this is a topic that obviously needs to be reviewed each year, and this year is no different. Last year's tactics for lead generation and ultimately moving new prospects down the sort of funnel, as it were, into being new customers, customer acquisition has become more expensive or more complex, let's say. Certain channels congested. What are you guys noticing that members are doing to get better performance out of their lead gen and onboarding of new customers?
So a couple of things. Obviously, George, some of the automation software. So we've had a couple of sessions and seen a couple of members doing some interesting stuff with automation, Zoom Info, Clay, those type of tools. And then hyper personalization on any of the outbound stuff is another trend. And then the final one is multi-channel, as opposed to hitting up someone just on a single channel. different different channels, maybe LinkedIn, email, WhatsApp, phone call, as opposed to just hitting people up on a single channel. And then the final one is as more B2B buyers get used to sort of the consumer experience, what some of the people will be doing is really focusing on building out really good content, case studies, to enable prospects to do way more research up front before making the buying decision. So what was happening context-wise is that 10 years ago, you would do all of your education after the first meeting. Now, because people are often doing their research online before the buying, they wanting to understand and have almost made most of the decision before actually meeting for the first sales meeting. So just ensuring that you are setting up prospects to be able to find all of the stuff they need, and that you're looking really good in the research stage. So the reviews are there, the case studies are there, they can spend some time Googling you and feel comfortable that this is sort of the top 3 that they should be considering.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there has been a bit of a shift. Like I noticed last year, there was much more of the focus, and the requests that were coming through were about outbound lead generation stuff. And this year it seems to be more around conversion. I don't know if that's because businesses have got better at the outbound now, with all the opportunities that we have. I mean, we know we've seen a big change in that space. Sort of outbound email campaigns have taken quite a big knock. LinkedIn's obviously on a massive rise, and the sort of generation of ongoing activity on platforms like LinkedIn through AI platforms has given people a much bigger voice. But we get quite a lot of people that say they get interest, they get inbound stuff coming in, they get stuff from trade shows, they get referrals, they get that initial first conversation. So they get the inbound or the response to their outbound campaign, and then it doesn't convert. It doesn't convert to a sales meeting, and sometimes the sales meeting doesn't convert to signing a contract. The one framework that I quite like, it doesn't seem to be as active online as it used to be, but there's a guy called Scott Oldford, had a framework called the SSF framework. He also wrote a book called The Nuclear Effect. And he just spoke about how all leads can be thought about in 3 different channels. So he uses SSF to relate to the sidewalk, the slow lane, and the fast lane. And basically the mindset of these different customers is the guys on the sidewalk are unaware. They don't know that they have a problem. The guys on the slow lane are unmotivated. They recognize their problem, but they're not really motivated to do anything about it, either because they don't know there's a solution, they don't think there's a solution, or they just got bigger priorities. And then the guys on the fast lane are the guys that are actively looking for a solution to the problem and trying to decide between options. So this has been very helpful to founders who have realized that there's a misalignment between their outbound campaign, their lead magnets, and what they're saying in a sales meeting. So for an accounting firm or something, for example, I mean, if you go out there on a Google ad saying, do you know about transfer pricing? And if you don't, and you're operating in more than one jurisdiction, you might be in breach of transfer pricing rules, SARS could be coming after you, etc., etc. That generates a flood of inbound requests. But then they get onto a sales meeting and they start talking about why their firm is best and the qualifications of their accountants, right? So this is someone coming in just going like, am I in trouble here? And they start selling them on features and benefits. There's just a complete misalignment between the mindset there. So if somebody's coming in through a mindset of I'm unaware of this problem, what you actually need to do is just explain the problem to them. Let them understand the problem. And if you're the one that explains that problem to them, they're likely to build trust with you and come back to you. They might not. There are further stages there. But that's generally. But you can't skip from someone that's unaware to treating them as if they're someone that's undecided and start talking about features and benefits. So you build a whole workflow that manages, outbound, lead magnets, etc. A whole workflow for the unaware, for the unmotivated, and for the undecided, and you keep them separate. And that seems to really improve people's conversion.
Maybe maybe as a quick follow-on from that, one of the mistakes we see often is someone hiring a salesperson as if they got this magic wand that they wave and all of a sudden like sales problems are taken care of. And I really loved, I'm going to reference the
They'll
book
come and
from
do what you
Impossible.
can't do.
Yeah, and we've actually got a sales expert in the community that's been working with founder-led businesses for years, and he blatantly said the other day, you'll never get someone to sell better than you can, so like manage your expectations up to 80%. But I'm going to reference the book From Impossible to Inevitable again, because they speak about the importance of role specialization, which I feel is often overlooked. And they get one person to do everything, but that compromises scale, it compromises performance management, like where they're actually dropping short. It compromises predictability of the model. So, we have seen members try and make use of like VAs to just take on the respective functions of the channel, at least from the prospecting role, to actually try and just spend your time or your high leverage staff's time on the most important function of that sales process. And at least then there's this higher rate of learning because everyone's focusing in their lane and they got a dedicated focus to say, how do I make this specific function of the process better?
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right,
just to build on. Okay,
Yeah,
go for
go
it,
for it, Paul.
George. No, it's just one of the best shares we had is we had Alex Gasson, who I think is one of the top sales guys in the country. He built sales teams for mostly fintechs doing 50 million plus revenue. But he basically spoke about having worked with a lot of founders building out their sales teams that founder genius is often the problem. The founders are really good salespeople, but they don't have a repeatable, simple process. And he was never able to build a successful team if the founder wasn't able to simplify their sales process and basically playbook it. The second it would have been simplified and playbook, he could then build a sales team. But if you had a founder genius which was just selling a different way each time and doing a hustle this way and that, like wasn't able to build a successful sales team.
Paul, while you're talking, I know one of the things you wanted to share was around tech stacks and having the right tools. Won't you just share on that, since I think it was a short but high impact point?
Yeah, just we had a session on tech stacks last month at one of the groups, and a lot of people just said how helpful it was. And I think the idea there is that there is so much great software out there for different use cases in your business that it's almost something that I would encourage founders to, if they're not the type of, because you have a range of founders. I think you have some of these very technical founders, maybe software businesses that just love tools. So they're sort of playing and testing with tools all the time. And basically as a result, they're getting a whole bunch of extra leverage in their company just because they're signing up with a tool and solving like a major problem in the business regarding management or upskilling. And it was just the idea there that it's probably not a bad idea to be spending some time as a founder understanding, are you using all the best tools for your stage of the business, and leveraging that to get a better performance out of you and your team.
Cool, awesome, thank you. And guys, coming in for our final topic today, obviously we can't have an episode and not talk about AI. It's 2025 after all. We're coming into this one quite humbly because a lot of our members are already lights ahead of our use cases and getting better themselves by sharing their insights. But nevertheless, what are you guys drawing from some of the best insights we're getting through masterclasses and your own experimentation? I'd love to hear what's hot and latest on your side.
So I think one of our members and basically part-time facilitator is Graham Rowe. He has been playing a lot around with AI. You can subscribe to his newsletter. Just hit him up on LinkedIn if you want to. It's Rowe with an E. And what he's been doing is coming up with really interesting prompts to basically help you in a game. Super cool prompts around like turning basically AI into a business coach that like calls you out on all of your stuff, forces you to ask a lot of different questions about you, and then give different opinions based on different personas and different bodies of work, as well as being able to use things for decision making like first principle thinking, being able to chuck in things like Charlie Munger's mental model framework, which is super hard to learn, but you can chuck it into AI and just ask it to be Charlie Munger and leverage all of the common frameworks and different things, and basically be able to analyze problems the same way Charlie Munger would, the genius that he is, super easily. So I think the power of being able to use AI as a strategic thought partner is been a game changer for me and Ryan. Certainly, in pretty much all of the decision making that we do, we try use some interesting prompts to do that. So that's just been the one use case. It's amazing if you get those prompts right, how much more impactful the answers are than if you just give it a one-liner. Like, hey, help me with this. If you do give it huge amounts of context and basically tee it up as like, this is the body of expertise we want you to pull on.
Yeah, I guess I can only second that. It's been really helpful just to leverage the intelligence behind the system beyond basic prompting, and how each of the different models, mental models, theories, game theories, just give a totally different response, really challenges your thinking in ways that might just be like a block consciously when you think of using AI from an input and a pure input and output perspective.
Awesome, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah, and Jeff Woods added his insights based on his AI-driven leader book masterclass we did a couple of weeks ago, which I loved. Really echoing what you did. But if anyone wants to catch that book, please make sure you get out that. Brett, final word.
No, I mean, just the one thing that I thought of while you were talking there. Again, I think there's a lot more we can do with AI amongst ourselves. But the other thing that's obviously made a massive difference, besides from just the sort of strategy type stuff and the questions that people are asking, and the integration that they're doing in the automation of their business, is very much on the content side as well. I mean, just the amalgamation of like a ChatGPT and a Gamma and a Canva. I mean, guys have got roles going where they just churning out high quality LinkedIn posts, very authentic sounding, in their tone, with their humor, integrating, carousels in their videos and things like that. And they've just got regular type posts that come out every week or every couple of days or whatever it is. So I think like some of the stuff that's being done there, even by founders that are not technical and not in technical businesses. Maybe I can mention one like Keelan Van Roy from Regan Van Roy, which is a tax advisory. She does just like a comical thing every Friday called the Fun Tax Fact. And I mean, they're ridiculous things, whatever. There was a tax in 1800 on, I don't know, tulips, whatever it is. Nonsense stuff that's just funny. But she was just saying how people are sort of contacting her and saying like, we're looking forward to your tax fact on Friday or whatever it is. And she used to do it manually, and now it's just completely automated. She's got a roll of like 100 of them ready. She's got to post them every Friday. So it's really amazing how people have managed to onboard this stuff so quickly.
And that brings us to the end of episode 2. Guys, thank you so much for your views, and looking forward very much to next month and hearing what is emerging and bubbling up in response to the emerging opportunities, threats. If you're an entrepreneur listening to this and want to find out more about Civitas, of course, go ahead to the website and learn about what we're all up to. But just thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
Cool. Thanks, George.